It always begins in the silence, when the world is loud but your soul is quiet, aching for something deeper. The pain doesn't scream, it whispers. And sometimes that whisper is the heaviest sound of all. You wear a smile, you show up, you function, but no one sees the storm crashing inside. And just when it feels like the darkness is permanent, a voice, soft yet undeniable, speaks through the noise. "Let me be your peace," it says, and suddenly the war inside you begins to lose its power. This is not just a story. It is your reflection, wrapped in shadows and shaped by grace. Listen closely. God is speaking. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in the quiet town of Elmridge. It wasn't just the kind that dampened sidewalks. It soaked into the bones, reminding everyone of things they'd rather forget. In a small house near the edge of town, Elena sat curled on the floor of her kitchen. Her eyes, swollen and red, stared into nothing. Another eviction notice. Another cold voicemail from her ex-husband. Another prayer that went unanswered. At least that's what she thought. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was so deep, carved from years of trying, giving, and being left empty. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a cup of cold coffee, not because of caffeine withdrawal, but because of the weight she carried silently every day. "God," she whispered into the empty room, "if you're there, say something. Please." But the silence was louder than ever. That night, as thunder cracked over the rooftops and winds howled like wounded wolves, Elena lay awake. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every betrayal, every loss, every moment she had been invisible to the world. The kind of grief that doesn't come from a single blow, but from 1,000 small cuts, all bleeding at once. Then came the dream. She found herself walking barefoot through a field. The grass was golden, warm under her feet, but the sky above was dark, swirling with a storm that hadn't yet touched the earth. She kept walking, toward what she didn't know until she saw him, a figure in white, radiant not with light, but with stillness, eyes that didn't burn but calmed. She didn't know how, but she knew it was him, God. "Elena," the voice said, not booming, not echoing, but deep and close, like it was inside her chest. "You carry storms that were never yours to hold." She froze. Tears spilled from her eyes without her permission. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask why he let her suffer, why he was silent when she screamed. But no words came out. He raised his hand, and the winds in the sky paused. "I was never absent. I was waiting for you to stop fighting alone." The dream ended, but the feeling did not. Elena awoke with tears already drying on her cheeks. The room felt different, not because anything had changed on the outside, but because something had shifted within her. The burdens were still there, the debt, the loneliness, the ache, but they weren't crushing her the same way. That morning, she did something she hadn't done in months. She sat by the window with her journal and wrote, not as a victim, but as someone searching for peace. "God, if you are my peace, teach me how to find you again." Across town, a man named Caleb stood at the edge of his office window. He was what most people would call successful. Sharp suit, high-rise view, a bank account that could silence any small problem. But there was one thing money had never fixed: the guilt. It had been 10 years since the car accident. 10 years since one careless decision cost his younger brother his life. Everyone told him to move on. It was just an accident, they said. But the echo of his brother's laugh haunted him, especially on quiet nights. He wore his grief like cologne, expensive, masked, but always lingering. Caleb had tried therapy, religion, running marathons, even writing anonymous letters to grieving families as some form of penance. But none of it worked. Not really. Then one night, while scrolling through videos on his phone, trying to distract himself from the weight he couldn't shake, he paused on a thumbnail. A simple title caught his eye. "Let me be your peace, God message today." He was about to skip it, but something in him hesitated. He clicked. A soft voice began. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just still. The speaker said words that struck something raw in Caleb's soul. "You've punished yourself long enough. I never asked you to stay in the prison of your past. I am not the voice of your guilt. I am the one who can free you from it. Caleb didn't know when it happened, but tears started to fall. He sank to the floor, phone forgotten, and wept, not like a man who had everything, but like a boy who had lost everything. That night, Caleb prayed for the first time in years, not with eloquent words, just a broken whisper. God, if you can still love me, I want to come home. Weeks passed. Elena's strength began to return, not because life became easier, but because her soul began to heal. She took small steps, applying for a job she thought she was unqualified for, speaking kindly to herself in the mirror, smiling without forcing it. She started sharing her story anonymously in online forums. At first, it felt weird, vulnerable, but then strangers responded. I felt this too. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You gave me hope. Hope, that elusive thing she thought she'd lost forever. One evening, she opened her messages and saw a new reply. It was from a man named Caleb. He wrote, "Your story saved me in ways I can't explain. I've spent years punishing myself. Your words felt like God was talking through you. Thank you for letting him use your pain." Elena stared at the message. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt chosen. She replied, "Maybe the storms we survive aren't punishments. Maybe they're invitations to become someone else's lighthouse." They kept talking, first online, then through calls, then in person. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two souls, both wounded, both healing, both slowly discovering that peace isn't found in perfection, but in presence. As the seasons shifted from rain to spring, something else blossomed. Not romance, though it hinted at it, but a kind of sacred friendship rooted in grace. Two people, both cracked open by life, became proof that God doesn't always remove storms. Sometimes he teaches you to dance in the rain. And in the soft, unseen moments, when Elena would journal by her window, or Caleb would pause before meeting to whisper a silent prayer, they would both hear that same voice again. Let me be your peace. And this time they didn't resist. Caleb hadn't stepped foot inside a church in nearly 15 years. But on a warm Sunday morning, something stirred within him. An urge not born of guilt, but invitation. Elena had mentioned a small chapel near the lake, quiet and humble, where people didn't go to perform, but to breathe. He walked through the doors slowly, hands stuffed in his pockets, heart thumping like it was his first day in court. Wooden pews lined the space, worn but welcoming. The stained glass windows caught sunlight just right, casting soft colors across the floor. At the front, no choir, no booming speaker, just a woman humming a gentle hymn, and an elderly pastor reading scripture quietly to himself. Caleb sat in the back, half hidden behind a pillar, but even in the quiet he felt exposed. Midway through the sermon, the pastor paused and looked directly at him, as if reading a letter etched on Caleb's soul. You've been trying to earn peace through pain. But peace is not earned, it's accepted. No thunder cracked, no spotlight fell. But those words hit harder than anything ever had. After the service, Caleb didn't speak to anyone. He just walked to the lake behind the chapel and stood at the edge. He whispered, "God, I want to stop running. I want to stop punishing myself." The wind picked up slightly, cool and calming. And in that still moment, he didn't hear a voice, but he felt one, like a weight slowly dissolving. For the first time in years, he took a breath without regret, clinging to it. A week later, Caleb asked Elena if she would join him at the lake again. They brought coffee, sat on the wooden bench near the water, and just listened to the birds. No agenda, no pressure. "I used to think God's voice would be loud," Caleb said. "Turns out it sounded more like mercy." Elena smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, and sometimes peace looks like this, two broken people sitting still and not trying to fix anything." She had started working again, part-time at a library, surrounded by books and soft-spoken souls. Her heart, once jagged with bitterness, had softened, not because life had become easier, but because she no longer held on to the illusion that peace came from circumstances. It came from surrender. One evening, she got a call. Her ex-husband, Michael, had been in a serious accident. He wasn't expected to survive the night. Elena sat with the phone to her ear, frozen. This man had betrayed her trust, dismantled her confidence, and left her to rebuild alone. And yet, something stirred in her chest, not hatred, not triumph. Something deeper. She found herself driving to the hospital, unsure why. When she arrived, the nurse said only family was allowed inside. Elena hesitated. Then she whispered, "I'm all he has left." In the dim hospital room, machines beeped steadily. Michael lay unconscious, pale and frail. She took a deep breath and sat beside him. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not because you deserved it, but because I did. I needed peace more than I needed revenge." His eyes fluttered open, just briefly, enough to see her, enough to whisper something she never expected. "I'm sorry." Then he closed his eyes again. Elena didn't cry. She didn't fall apart. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "God, thank you for letting me be free." Later that night, she met Caleb at their bench by the lake. She told him everything. "I should feel angry, but I don't. I just feel light." He nodded. Forgiveness does that. It cuts the chains you never knew you were dragging. They sat in silence for a while, watching the moon reflect on the water. "Elena," Caleb finally said, "I've been praying about something." She turned to him, curious. "Not about us," he added quickly, chuckling nervously. "Though maybe one day. No, I've been praying about purpose. About what God wants to do with everything I've been through." She nodded, understanding. "You want to make meaning out of the pain." "Exactly. And I think I want to start something, a foundation maybe, for families affected by loss, for people carrying silent grief. I want to show them what someone once showed me, that it's okay to fall apart, as long as you let God put you back together." Elena smiled. "I'll help you, every step." And so, the Peace Project was born. It started small, letters to grieving strangers, monthly meetups at the Lakeside Chapel, food drives, mental health sessions. But it grew quietly and powerfully, not from money or publicity, but from authenticity, from truth. People from all walks of life came, drawn not by religion, but by a whisper in their souls that said, "There's more than this pain." One young girl, Mia, had lost both parents in a fire. She hadn't spoken in months. But one day, during a lakeside gathering, she handed Caleb a note. It said, "Your story makes me feel like I'm not invisible anymore." He wept. Another man, Andre, shared that he had planned to take his life. But video of Elena's message had played at the right time. "It felt like God interrupted my despair," he said. Every testimony was a ripple. Every act of peace sent waves through hearts too used to chaos. Years passed. The lake remained, ever still, ever constant. Elena and Caleb grew older, not just in age, but in wisdom, in faith. They never married, though people often assumed they had. Their bond transcended titles. It was a covenant of understanding, of shared healing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elena sat at their usual bench. Caleb had gone home early, not feeling well. She pulled out her journal and wrote, "God, I once asked you where you were. Now I see. You were in every crack, every fall, every rising. You never left. I just needed to be still long enough to hear you say, 'Let me be your peace.'" A cool wind passed through the trees. She closed her eyes and smiled. Caleb passed peacefully in his sleep that night. No suffering, no pain, just rest. At his funeral, hundreds gathered, strangers, friends, lost souls he once found and guided. Elena stood before them, voice steady but soft. "Caleb taught me that peace is not a destination. It's a person, and that person is still here, still calling, still whispering in our chaos. Let me be your peace." She paused, letting the silence settle. So if you're here today carrying storms in your soul, if you've buried things no one knows about, if the noise inside you is louder than the world outside, listen, because peace isn't found in the absence of pain, but in the presence of God. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and he is still speaking. Life didn't stop bringing storms. Elena still had days of doubt, moments of ache, but they no longer drowned her. She had learned to float in grace. Every night before sleep, she would whisper the same prayer: God, be my peace. And without fail, peace would answer. Because when God speaks, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sounds like the beating of your heart finally slowing down. Sometimes it sounds like forgiveness. Sometimes like surrender. And sometimes it sounds just like this: let me be your peace.